Welcome to Econ 102, where economist Noah Smith and I make sense of what's happening in the news, technology, business, and beyond through the lens of economics. Let's jump right in.
So I'm trying to remember, where did we we finished on Turkey. So let's just talk about the Middle East. What countries are worth analyzing their economies and giving them advice in the Middle East?
Well, let's talk about Egypt.
Let's do it.
Egypt does not have a lot of oil and has a lot of people, so that's a big problem. In addition, Egypt has no water. So everyone in Egypt lives along one river, the Nile. You may have heard of it, and or in the Nile Delta. And so if you look at a picture of Egypt tonight, it's just this one little thin snaking ribbon of light. And if you look at a population density map, it's exactly the same. Egypt is poor. It is not really that developed, but it's highly urbanized. Everyone's really crammed into sort of close space, but it also has somewhat high fertility rates. Like it's not like Nigeria level high, but it's high, and so Egypt is in big trouble. They need something to do. There's a lot of obvious things that Egypt could do. One is put up a bunch of solar panels. So you could have a huge amount of solar panels in the desert and then run cables to Greece, or whatever is like right across the pond, Greece. You could do that, right? You could deliver power to the EU. The losses actually from that length of cable aren't actually that big. You could have manufacturing. So you could set up special economic zones near the coast. You'd need water. For a lot of these things, you can use seawater. For some things, you might need desalination. That's expensive. You can't really use the Nile because Egypt's already kind of bone dry. It needs every drop of the Nile to feed those people. But you can, there's a lot of stuff you actually can do that doesn't take much fresh water in terms of manufacturing that could be done cheaply. And you've got all these people there. India has actually, Egypt has proven itself very adept at building infrastructure. So sort of, this is funny because it's, a very classic trope, like let's build a giant pyramid, right? It's like sort of the first thing you think of when you think of Egypt. And they sort of still do that, right? They're building this giant new, capital city, and just, massive highways and vast apartment blocks. Cairo is from aerial photos, it is the ugliest city I've ever seen. It has no greenery. It looks like the surface of the Death Star in the first Star Wars movie. Just this sort of like barren landscape with like blocky protrusions, intermittently. It's just really grim. But they're willing to build. Egypt builds, and so that's good. And so really, that's what they need to do. One big problem for Egypt is that they get a lot of money from the Red Sea trade, right? So Europe sends stuff through the Suez Canal, then out through the Bab al Mandab or whatever, to the Indian Ocean and China, right? It's this big, the maritime Silk Road is that. And so that saves European ships from having to sail around Africa if they want to get to China and vice versa. And this has been closed by the Houthis, right? The Houthis have, they're this militia in Yemen. They sort of took over Yemen with Iranian help. And they're now, launch random missile attacks and piracy. And they're not very good at destroying ships. And they're not very good at deciding which ships to destroy. The other day, they made a deal with the Chinese. They said, we're not going to destroy your ships because you're pro-Palestine or whatever, which is fake, but whatever. And so then they made that deal, and then they immediately just hit a Chinese ship. So they don't know whose ship is what. And they're not incredibly dangerous. Like they don't sink or destroy a lot of ships, but they're dangerous enough that, people are like, okay, we'll just go around. Let's just go around Africa, like far away from Houthis. And so they do. And the problem here is that Egypt is now cut out of the loop. So Egypt's commerce is doing really badly, and Egyptians are going to have trouble affording like food, right? Because, some of their export revenue comes from the Suez Canal. So really Egypt needs a big bailout, and they, in the short term and in the long term, they need to become not dependent on the Suez Canal, because, you've got the Houthis on one side, and the other side, what's exactly on the opposite side of the Red Sea from the Houthis is Somalia. So, it's like Yemen and Somalia at your choke point, you're screwed. Like, who thought that was going to be a sustainable thing? Anyway, so that's where Egypt really is, and so they're in big trouble. But they have a bright future if they can get some, like, basically, I think, solar power and manufacturing up along the coast, and basically be more integrated with Europe.
That makes sense. Before getting into Africa, are there any other countries in the Middle East that we should give advice?
Saudi Arabia, of course. So Saudi Arabia, basically, if by some measures of per capita GDP, so estimates can disagree a bit because, a lot of Saudi revenue is not clear, like oil revenue is not clear. But according to the World Bank, Saudi Arabia's per capita GDP has not grown since 1991. Saudis, we still think of Saudis as very rich, but they are no richer than they were in 1991. And slowly, this is eroding how rich they seem, right? So back in the 90s, like, the Gulf oil people just seemed fabulously rich. And of course, Dubai still does, but Saudi Arabia seemed fabulously rich. It was this place where everybody had all this money. Their population kept growing. Their oil revenues didn't really grow. They didn't really expand production. Saudi Arabia had market power over the oil market, right? So you had OPEC, right, which was this whole group of countries that's supposed to act together. But in reality, what you really had was Saudi Arabia, instead of OPEC, raising and cutting the level of oil they produced. What you really had was Saudi Arabia raising and cutting the level of oil it produced, and everyone else kind of following a little bit, or that really just often being enough to push around oil prices on its own. And so so Saudi Arabia was called the swing producer, and it was very important for setting oil prices. So Saudi Arabia could actually cut oil output, but actually increase their revenue because of their outsized effect on prices. And that's nuts, right? Like, you don't think that shouldn't happen. You shouldn't be able to, like, sell less stuff and make more money on it. But they did. And so that's gone, is the thing, because the rest of the world found a bunch more oil. The United States fracked and drilled for oil here. Russia expanded, Nigeria expanded, Venezuela expanded, then crashed, and may now be expanding again. But basically, Saudi Arabia became a much less important oil producer, and at the same time, their easily exploited sources of oil sort of ran out. Well, they didn't run out of oil, but they ran out of new, easily exploited sources. And I think the last sort of, like, really classic, sort of close to the surface, super cheap, oil just bubbling up under your feet sort of fields that they tapped in the 2000s when we had that giant price spike, right? They tapped their last sort of, like, easy reserves. And so they still have a ton of oil down there, but it's it takes increasing amounts of investment to get it out, right? Because you have to drill, like, even more wells, and then your level goes down, and then you have to drill deeper, and blah, blah, blah. That's happening to them. And so they see the writing on the wall. And so that's the writing on the wall for Saudi Arabia, increased oil scarcity. And because, the downside of having this, like, sand and all the oil near the top, and the classic benefit of Saudi Arabia, the downside is that you use it up faster than other places, right? So you run out of oil before everybody else. Mexico ran out before Saudi Arabia, but that's another story. Anyway, so Saudi Arabia, they're trying to pivot, right? Oh, there's also electric cars, right? Electric cars are going to take over. Batteries are going to take over from oil. And so Saudi Arabia needs to find other stuff to do. So they're building this giant, sort of new city called Neom, with this giant line thing, this huge monument building, like, that makes, like, it's basically like the Great Wall of China skyscraper version. And everyone's going to live inside one giant linear skyscraper. It's kind of nuts. Like, what are you going to do there? And it's built far away from all their people, because Saudi Arabia has always viewed its people as sort of a liability, sort of this restive group of people who needs to be paid off, or else they'll do terrorism or just attack and destroy the state. And so they always just paid off the people with oil. And so now they're building the city far away from the people who could, slaughter the princes and, like, whatever, take their jewels. I don't know. And so, so they're doing this, and they're trying to court people to be there. Of course, they want it to be like a new Dubai, right? Everyone's like, oh, Dubai, that succeeded. You've got these amazing hotels, and, like, you can ski inside and all this stuff, right? Dubai is this famous place. And all the rich people go there, and they're like, well, we could just do another. It's not clear how much demand for more Dubais there really is. Like, if you just build, like, 100 Dubais, like, how do you differentiate yourself, right? It's like there's not really room for more than one Las Vegas. Like, yeah, you have Atlantic City, you have Reno, but, like, how well are Atlantic City and Reno really doing, right? There's only one Vegas in America, and it's Vegas.
Thank God. Imagine multiple Vegas.
Thank God. It's, yeah. So So yeah, that's what's going on there. And so I don't know how this is going to work. They're courting a lot of tech people and they're funding a lot of tech people. People are like, oh my God, this tech person took money from Saudi Arabia. Well, everybody did. I would. Like, Saudi Arabia is like, here is a bucket of money. Shakes it over your head. Like, you take that money, right? Like, that doesn't mean you're like complicit in the genocide. Shut up. Like, take that money. And so yeah, right. So I mean, like Saudi Arabia, they're not good guys. They're not like good people. It's not a good regime, right? But it's going to remain allied with America because ultimately Saudi Arabia is like anti-Iran, at least until Iran mullahs get overthrown or whatever. And until that happens, Saudi Arabia is going to be an ally of America, and so it's going to be this like Western outpost. Actually, Saudi Arabia is becoming, a bit more quote unquote Westernized. They just allowed their beauty queen to compete without a hijab.
Wow.
So that's big deal. They also switched to the Roman calendar. Big step there. So Saudi Arabia and women are getting a little more freedoms there. This is happening in Iran too, but with much more violence and bloodshed and brutality and torture. But in Saudi Arabia, it's happening sort of like slowly and peacefully, which is good. And this is, just geopolitically, people are way too interested in the idea that America should purity test our allies. I don't want to go right out there and be like, Hitler, oh, your best friend. But like, we do have to choose the lesser of two evils whenever we want to get geopolitically involved. We always need allies, and we need to choose the lesser of two evils every time, which is why we allied with Stalin over Hitler, which is actually a good move, even though Stalin is like, when the worst guy in the world fights the second worst guy in the world, you ally with the second worst guy in the world. And then you say, oh shit, we allied with the second worst guy in the world. But that's what you do. And that's what, with Saudi Arabia, it was Saudi Arabia or Iran. Like Saudi Arabia was, I mean, they're not totally peaceful, but they're a lot more peaceful than Iran. So we allied with them. They were a status quo power where Iran sent guys to the Hajj, the Muslim pilgrimage, and like shot it up. Right. They had gunmen just shoot the pilgrim. Like, that's really fucked. And so, we chose the lesser of two evils, but we were able to nudge them toward being more, a little bit more like what we think of as being like Westernized or not Westernized. That's a stupid word, but like, democratic, liberal, capitalist, all the stuff. We were able to nudge them in that direction. Like we were able to nudge South Korea. South Korea started off as a dictatorship, right? We nudged them in the right direction. Indonesia started off as a dictatorship that slaughtered 500,000 Indonesians. Who are communist, suspected of being communist sympathizers, like McCarthy, but genocide version. And yet Indonesia is now, a somewhat liberal democracy, much more liberal than other states in the region. Taiwan was a dictatorship, pretty brutal in its early days, but now it's nice and democratic and happy, and they have Pride Parade and whatever. So, if you think of this as like, the woke empire, we're going to turn everyone into the they them army. Well, like that's mostly bullshit, but it's like 0.1% actually true. That's one. Wokeness is like one of many, 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 many things that people will get more of once they get individual freedom, right? Once they get the freedom to just sort of express themselves, that's one of the many things that people are going to express. And so we do nudge countries toward being more free. I think that's good. Saudi Arabia is bad, like the regime is bad, and yet I don't want to throw the alliance under the bus just yet. All right, so I think that about does it for the Middle East.
Yeah.
We'll get back to the conversation in a moment after a word from our sponsors. Hey everyone, Erik here. At Turpentine, we're building the first media outlet for tech people by tech people. We're the network behind the show you're listening to right now. We have a slate of hit shows across a range of topics and industries, from our AI and investing cluster of podcasts to shows that drive the conversation in tech with the most interesting thinkers, founders, investors, and influencers, like Econ 102 with Noah Smith. We're launching new shows every week, and we're looking for industry-leading sponsors. If you think that might be you and your company, email me at erikaturpentine.co. That's ERIK at turpentine.co, and let's partner together.
Great. Okay, now let's transition to Africa.
Africa is bigger than people realize, partly because they often use map projections that make Africa look smaller than it is. But it is really, 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 really big. Africa is like, it's bigger than North America, by quite a bit. And, just the Sahara Desert is the size of the entire United States. So, or continental United States. But yeah, the size Sahara Desert, really big and growing every year. Africa has a lot of people. It has like what 1.2 billion people, 1.3. Hold on, let me actually look that up. Yeah, 1.2 billion people. Maybe I don't know. Oh no, what, Africa 1.48 billion. Like so Africa is growing really fast. Africa is where all the kids are. As a continent, Africa is not a country; it's a continent. Now that's not to be so. Often it's divided up into sub-Saharan Africa and North Africa. This is a purely sort of cultural geopolitical division because North Africans are, Arab-ish. They're, some sort of Arab. They're Muslim primarily, and they're very connected to the Middle East, and they're somewhat connected to Europe. And sub-Saharan Africa is like very different. There's like a United States-sized desert between that. So those regions are often divided up. Also, the people in North Africa largely look sort of white, and the people in sub-Saharan Africa largely look sort of black. And that's why they divide that up. It's not necessarily the smartest division of a continent, but that is. So a lot of the statistics you see are actually for sub-Saharan Africa. But anyway, sub-Saharan Africa is where the kids are in the world, like Nigeria and Democratic Republic of Congo and Angola, Mozambique, Chad. With a lot of countries, you had like it was originally a region that then got its name changed to a country. So you had the Ukraine became Ukraine, the Sudan became Sudan. But I argue that Chad, which started as Chad, should now become the Chad because it is the Chad, and it's kind of funny how America is gonna like end up really like supporting this like random desert country in Africa simply because of a goofy meme. But it will happen. We are going to have like a special relationship with Chad because of a meme.
Wow, Chad lucked out.
Chad lucked out. Yeah. It's like Jordan's like, you could have been the Jordan. Exactly. You could have been named Jordan. And then, anyway,
that's funny.
Right. So right. We want to invest in Chad, disinvest in the Virgin Islands. Well, do you notice that in the original meme, the Chad, his head is the country of Chad, whereas the Virgin's head is one of the Virgin Islands.
I didn't appreciate that. That's really funny.
Little Easter egg in the meme. Anyway, so beyond that, Africa has a lot of people, and Africa has traditionally been a natural resource exporter. It's been like Latin America, or Australia, wherever. It has been a resource exporter. And it sold minerals and whatever. And partly that was because of colonialism. Like when the Europeans show up, they're like, what can we get here? Rocks. So then, and like, how will we get the rocks? Well, maybe there's some local guys who could get these rocks for us by brutalizing a local population for us. And we could give them a few soldiers to help them do that. And that was African colonialism, at least in the, Belgian and French areas. British were like a little better. Anyway, so that was African colonialism, but it was this resource exporting region. And then in the 60s, you had this idea of resource nationalism of like, well, let's nationalize. Africa needs to nationalize the resources so it doesn't keep selling them at cut rate prices to these exploitative foreign companies that are just doing neocolonialism, which largely they did. But then some were very, when you have resource dependent economies, you'll always have political turmoil because the way you get money is not by having like, nice cities with trains that run on time and, like education systems and factories and all this stuff that like, you need this state capacity and human capital and all those nice words, right? With resource countries, whether it's Middle Eastern, oil kind of petrostates, or whether it's, African like mineral minor states, right? What you need is just to dig up rocks, and that's very capital intensive, and you need a few people to do it, but you don't need a lot of people, and so you don't need like a well-educated populace and all this blah blah blah. You just need to dig up some rocks, and so this produces a power struggle at the top. It's called the resource curse. And this is classic thing, overthrow the government. Now it's my rocks, my pile of rocks. And the people who live here, well, they're just trash, just shoot them, whatever. And so that's the classic resource curse problem. Some countries have escaped this. So Botswana, is a country that has, largely escaped the resource curse. Botswana produces diamonds. When you see a diamond is forever, that comes from De Beers. And De Beers was a Dutch company that, mined a bunch of diamonds in Africa and sort of monopolized the diamond trade and came up with that slogan, "A diamond is forever." And they mined the diamonds in Botswana. And so Botswana, I think it was in the 1980s, Botswana managed to do a hostile takeover of De Beers. Not 100%, but they didn't take over 100%, but they managed to basically make a deal with De Beers to bail them out when the Russians and some other people started competing with them for the diamond trade. And De Beers suddenly didn't have a monopoly anymore, and it was competing really hard. And Botswana's like, okay, we'll help you by opening up all these mines and blah, 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 but we're going to bail you out with government money. So Botswana raised a bunch of tax money and bailed out De Beers. And now basically De Beers is like Botswana. Oh, and so so Botswana is the diamond trade. It doesn't have a large population. Diamond's not a huge commodity, but Botswana is not a huge country either. They put their money that they get from the diamond trade into education and health and housing and all the other things like that. And it's really nice. And Botswana is a nice place to live as a result. And they have baby lions you can pet. And so that's why I want to go there and pet some baby lions. Anyway, but yeah, Botswana's doing great. And, but one thing Botswana has that a lot of countries in post-colonial Africa do not have is ethnic unity. So Botswana is essentially, when Europeans came in there and carved up these countries, they didn't really carve it according to the local concepts of ethnicities, right? It's so suppose someone had colonized Europe and okay, we'll have this part of France and this part of Germany together because there's a certain kind of rock, it's the Ruhr Valley or whatever. So it's oh, you're French, you're German, whatever. These are our rocks, right? And so they drew these lines, and of course, where Britain and France fought each other, and the dividing lines between those became important. And so when they left these artificial states there. So Nigeria is a great example of this, right? Because you have Nigeria has a million different ethnic groups, three big ones: the Hausa Fulani, who are basically in the north. They're very Islamist. They're sort of traditional pastoralist society. They have their reputation as the jocks. They go into the army and they're they'll right. So and then you have the Igbo, who have their sort of the reputation of being the nerds, and then the Yoruba, who also have the reputation of being the nerds. But they're sort of it's the Igbo will be more engineer nerds, and the Yoruba will be more lawyer nerds, is the reputation. These are all bullshit. But, that's the reputation that these people have. So anyway, the Igbo tried to secede. They created a little country called Biafra. The other groups just joined in to basically crush the heck out of them. If do you know the product guy Dario Obasanjo on Twitter?
Yes, I do. Yes.
Yeah, it was his dad.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, his dad crushed that rebellion.
Fascinating.
One of the guys, but he was the main guy. His credit to his dad. So everybody thought that they would genocide the Igbo in the after this to discipline them and punish them for trying to secede. They did not, and it was his dad who was okay, don't. We're just gonna reaccept you back into the country. So then he peacefully reintegrated the country after that civil war. So that's to his credit. Olusegun Obasanjo is his name, and he was president of Nigeria for a while. But anyway, so that happened, and then a lot of the Igbo, emigrated. But the point is that you had all these people were thrown together in a single country because Britain just decreed that it would be so, right? And of course, the boundaries between that and French-ruled countries also decree that it'll be so. You have this country, Nigeria, and Niger, which is just French for Nigeria, is above it, right? That's full of Hausa Fulani people as well. It's one of the it's the highest fertility rate country in the world by far, actually. It's way above number 2. They all speak French, and so the dividing line is completely arbitrary. It's Britain versus France in the colonial era, 19th century, and so so that's. These artificial states have trouble cohering because you get all these tribes fighting each other. Kenya, same way. And, over time, you can sort of knit yourself into a country, but it takes a really long time for that to happen. And, in Europe, this process led to centuries of war. Like Europe had this ethnic fragmentation too, right? You have like a few guys live in this corner and they're like the Ossetians, and here's the people who speak Catalan. And Europe was like this. Europe was basically just like, Africa North version. And then yet over the centuries of war that we Eurocentric idiots now learn about, right? Over those centuries of war, they rationalized their countries and they were like, well, this is le français, it's like you have kings fighting with power for the local nobles, and you have like ethnic, sort of nationalism where they're like, don't speak Catalan, no, speak French. And then, they sort of build it up, and then they have all these wars with each other, which breeds a sense of national solidarity and defines borders and blah, blah, blah. And then you have these bureaucracies. And so Europe really like dragged itself up from this sort of ethnic mishmash morass, and Africa, it just hasn't done that yet. And it has done it a little bit in some places. Right. And, unfortunately, this often looks genocidal. And it looked genocidal in Europe. Like in Europe, you would definitely have massacres and genocides all the time back in the day. And, now in Africa, you have things like Rwandan genocide. That's really bad. But that is how Europe sort of developed states, and Africa just hasn't done that. So assuming that Africa does not do that, because it was kind of shitty for Europe to have like literal millennia of genocidal war. During which time it was mostly poor. So that would be bad for Africa. So maybe Africa can find a better way. But in the meantime, it is stuck with this kind of thing. And so Botswana is different because you had this one ethnicity, the Tswana, where the Botswana name comes from. You had the Tswana ethnicity, which was just happened to be coincident with this plot of land called Botswana. And that they acted with sort of like ethnic solidarity. And they were like, okay, well, we want our people to have some health care and housing and education and all these things. And they really provided for their people. And it was this, more collectivist enterprise that was successful. And unfortunately, much of Africa doesn't have the political wherewithal to sort of do that. And so you've got these dysfunctional states. So the hope, so now Africa's gaining population. If you look at the future of human population, it's all Africa. Yeah, like in the Star Trek future, like 8 out of 10 people are African. Like that's the future that's going to happen.
What does that mean for Africa's like geopolitical stance in the world?
Well, so I mean, Africa is going to become much more important. Like Africa in like 100 years from now, people will start thinking of Africa as the center of the world, right? 80 years from now, they will start. I won't say it will flip overnight, but people start thinking of Africa as like, the most important place, because that's where all the young people will be. Who knows whether we'll all be uploaded to the cloud or replaced by AI or, cyborgs or like, whatever, right? Killed by a runaway bioplague by then. I can't predict the future, but assuming that, demographics continue to be important, Africa is going to be super important. And by the way, the future population of Africa has been revised massively down. So fertility rates in Africa have dropped really fast in recent years. They started from a high base and they started dropping later than other countries, but they are dropping quite fast. And so Africa is now projected, old projections were for Africa to have like 5 billion people, right? And now Africa is projected to have like maybe 2.7. Africa is projected to like a little more than double in population by the time it tops out. And its population is 1.4, 1.5 billion now. So Africa will reach about 3 billion now. That's down from like, people thought it was going to be like 5 or even 6 billion. They were just these giganto projections. And it turned out that's not happening. But like, we're going to get 1.5 billion more Africans in the world, even as other places just shrink and dwindle. And so this is going to make Africa really important.
Is India a good comp, or like, sort of how India became? Yeah.
India's a great comp. India's fertility dropped faster as a function of economic growth than any other place in world history. Like India was the champ of fertility reduction, right? The slowest fertility reductions came in Europe, actually. That took European fertility is kind of low, but it took centuries to decline with economic growth. But then India is just like, one day they have like 6 kids, and then the next day it's like 2, right? It's like, and so that was just, very rapid. Iran too, actually. Iran had an extremely fast population fertility drop off. And of course, China had the one-child policy, but even they were not quite as fast even though they had it as a policy. Africa's is dropping pretty fast. It's like Africa is dropping, not quite as fast as India, but maybe like a China speed. And so we don't know how low it'll go, right? It could stop out at 3. It could stop out at 2.5. It could stop out above replacement. We don't actually know. But it is dropping pretty fast. So now I think this is one of those cases where you have to look at sub-Saharan Africa because that's how they define it. For sub-Saharan Africa's fertility rate is 4.6. That's really high in terms of compared to the rest of the world when you consider that like rich countries tend to be like 1.5, right? 3 times, sub-Saharan Africa is having 3 times as many kids per family as rich countries. But it is a lot lower than it was. Like you go back, a few years and that was 6. So, by some time in mid-century, a lot of these countries, mid 2060-ish, a lot of these countries are going to be hitting replacement level fertility. And then humanity's kind of, our rainbow's over, right? Like unless we figure out some other way to raise fertility or, some way for rich countries to like raise fertility again, which no one's figured out yet. That is the end of, like the agricultural age. Will happen in 2060 when Africa stops having like stops having above replacement fertility. That will be the end of like, we're poor and we need people to work the farm and whatever. So we're just going to have a bunch of kids. Like that was the story of humanity for millennia, and that will be over. And that's a big deal. And, but in the meantime, Africa is where all the people are. And so it really would do well for Africa. It would do a lot of good for Africa to have factories there. Labor intensive factories where you make shoes, clothing, toys, furniture, anything that's like, takes a lot of people, sort of swarming around and like making a thing to make. That's what Africa needs. So, some development economists are sort of despair of this. They're like, oh, Africa will never be able to do this. Danny Roderick and some other people. I don't think so. I'm more optimistic than they are. I think Africa will be able to do this. How much? I'm not sure. Africa needs Chinese investment. So especially from the south of China, you had all these labor-intensive factories. Now a lot of them are going to Bangladesh, India, Vietnam. Africa might have to wait its turn, unfortunately, for this because there's this idea called flying geese, where the factory owners who make stuff cheap fly from country to country like geese. This is a Japanese theory, so I guess they liked geese as a metaphor. But so the geese flock, they fly in a flock. So all the like people who want to do labor intensive, low end manufacturing are now going to Bangladesh, India, and Vietnam. Although decreasingly Vietnam, because Vietnam is wages are getting higher. African wages still low. Tanzania, Ethiopia, if it would stop having civil wars, was attracting a lot of investment. Some other places, Rwanda, Rwanda's actually doing all right now. And so there's a lot of places where you can do this and just have a lot of, especially East Africa, because it's right across the Indian Ocean from China. Africa may be able to get investment from China, like it looked like Ethiopia was on that track. Or it may have to wait until investment all goes to like India, and then we sort of saturate the India, Bangladesh, and Vietnam, and then the flying geese then fly to East Africa. But it is going to happen. Tanzania will be a thing. Mozambique, I think. Kenya, they'll have high populations and lots. The things will be very labor intensive manufacturing. So that's going to be a big deal. So I think if we want to look at Tanzania. We want to look at Kenya, Mozambique, Ethiopia, and all these countries that are sort of on the east side. Somalia is in practice is just going to be too chaotic and war torn. This is not going to include South Africa because South Africa's wages are way too high. Like South Africa South Africa is more like a Latin American country in that it, in terms of where it is industrially, like it exports a lot of resources very efficiently, but that raises its exchange rate, right? Because when you export a lot of stuff, whatever it is, people need your currency to buy it, so they buy your currency, so it pushes up the value of your currency, which pushes up your wages and makes you less competitive. So this is called Dutch disease. South Africa has Dutch disease. in a number of senses of the word. He he he. But then, so that's going on there. In West Africa is just far away, right? It's like it's far away. You could do some of this with like Nigeria and Ghana and you know, Ivory Coast, whatever, but it's not. You're going to get East Africa is going to do it first, and so I think that look for East African manufacturing development to be like a deal, but I don't know exactly when.
Yeah. Shall we transition to South America, or is there anything else in Africa that we haven't covered yet? I know.
Let me think about stuff in Africa. I mean, there's still some countries that need basically security, that need to stop having war. One of them is the ever unfortunate Democratic Republic of Congo. Democratic Republic of Congo is like one of the most unfortunate countries in the world. I'm trying to think of another country that's less fortunate and difficult, right? Like even Ukraine. Democratic Republic of Congo is like worse off. Like first they got colonized by the frickin' king of Belgium, who was insane and who just is like, you know, give me the minerals, and he just got local elites to just like terrorize and kill anybody, cut off their hands. Do you know the famous picture of the guy like looking at like his daughter's hand, severed hand?
Yeah.
Like that was the Belgian Congo, right? It was horrible. It was the worst episode of European colonialism anywhere. It was so bad that like when some muckraking journalists went there and found out what was going on, the Belgian parliament nationalized the colony and took it over from the king, took it away from the king. You know, Belgium's not a real country, really. But the parliament actually stood up and did something for once and overruled the king because of this colonial horror. And they mostly put an end to the colonial horror. Mostly, I mean, most of it was being done by local elites at the behest of the king. But so they mostly put an end to it. Then they had all this mishmash of ethnicities, and so in the 1990s, it became the site of Africa's biggest war ever, when essentially a whole bunch of different African countries sent their armies into the Democratic Republic of Congo to either protect people who are the same ethnicity as them, or like protect their other interests, or like just keep instability away. And the whole country was torn by war. Now this is a country like the size of like the entire central United States. Like it's a giganto country. And yet it's full of all these disparate ethnicities who have, basically it's like it's the most artificial of all states. It is the least nationalistic. It has extremely high fertility. It's extremely poor. This is where like the blood diamonds and the conflict, you know, minerals and the child soldiers and slaves and awful shit comes from. Is the Congo is Democratic Republic of Congo. And this is where the book Heart of Darkness is about. Right. I mean, Heart of Darkness is about the colonialism of this area and how it you know, drove people insane. And so, but then, so it really got screwed. And it had, in the 90s, it had like 3 million people killed in a war. That's nuts. Like, when's the last time 3 million people died in a war besides that? Like World War One, maybe two, like World War II is like, or Vietnam War, I guess. It's the only other one. And so huge war, it's really screwed. It needs security. The Democratic Republic of Congo needs security. Nigeria absolutely needs security. They've got like, you know, Nigeria has this problem where the South is basically like a lot more peaceful and educated, and the North is violent and war torn, and has like Boko Haram is this you know, terrorist group that runs around kidnapping people and just doing horrible things. And so Nigeria and Democratic Republic of Congo and Somalia need security. So there's just a few of these countries that really just have perennial violence, endemic violence, and need security. And so that's important in Africa. Anyway, let's go on to Latin America.
Let's do it. Which country should we cover first?
Mexico, of course.
Okay.
Mexico has a lot of manufacturing, and now that people are trying to get out of China, it has even more manufacturing. And Mexico makes a lot of cars, it makes a lot of PCs, it makes a lot of other stuff for America. And somehow in Mexico, this hasn't been enough. Mexican living standards have grown, but only slowly. Mexico is it's an upper middle income country. Like it's, you know, Mexico's like $20-something thousand per person. Like this is not a poor country, right? It's not a rich country either, but it's not a poor country. And so they had one giant oil field called Cantarell that basically ran out. They tapped it out. And so that was a real it was very difficult for them to switch from sort of like petrostate oil to like, oh, we have to manufacture stuff. They have been switching, and they have a lot of export revenue. Mexico exports a shit ton of manufactured stuff. They have a manufacturing cluster, right? And the problem is they can't turn that manufacturing cluster into a thriving domestic service economy at all, right? They can't. Their domestic economy is totally bollocksed, as the British say. It's totally screwed because of violence, endemic violence. So in Mexico, you have all these narco gangs that sort of are like warlords that rule their little towns. And you have the army that's supposed to fight them that often either becomes a gang itself or more commonly gets bribed, or sometimes just gets shot and defeated in battle by the narco gangs. And this Mexican drug war kills, 30,000 people a year or something. Some years it's less, right? So it dies down and then comes back, depending on whether the gangs are fighting each other. And whole cities get ceded to these people. When I was a kid in Texas, back in like the 90s, we'd drive across the border. You didn't need a passport. We'd drive across the border to Juarez, which is south of El Paso. And we just hang out and we'd, do whatever touristy things, eat food, ride donkeys, watch flamenco dancers, whatever, right? Like touristy things. And then you can't do that in Juarez now. You'll get like mugged, kidnapped, shot, and hung from a gas station as a warning, right? It's like, I don't want to be cultural essentialists, but some of these guys have really brought back human sacrifice.
Wow.
In Mexico, it's really bad. Like these guys, the Zetas, the Sinaloa cartel, the Gulf cartel. These are like really, really bad. They need like Superman and Batman or something to like stop these guys. But and of course, America's Mexican mafia are primarily extensions of these guys, right? You have the two big umbrella Latino gangs in America are the Norteños and the Sureños, right? Have you heard of these names?
I have not, no.
They actually have territory in San Francisco. So there is a Norteños territory and a Sureños territory. And what irritates me is that the Norteños territory is actually to the south of the Sureños territory, which makes no sense. But Norteños are just like, Mexican Americans basically, where Sureños are basically like the Mexican mafia. And that's why it's north versus south. Anyway, so you have some mafia wars there. But then this is all just like, it's 1% of what's going on in Mexico. That really doesn't spill up here that much. Like El Paso is like the safest city in America, and it's right across the river from Juarez, which is the most dangerous city in Mexico. So it's like night and day, right? You have a murder rate of like 2 versus a murder rate of like 100. It's ridiculous. But this violence is really just degrading Mexico's capacity as a state. And it has not yet got this under control. So Mexico is our own Democratic Republic of Congo, for different reasons, but it is a perennially war-torn sort of state, and that's bad. It needs to get security, but I don't know how it can do that. Like I'm not an expert in this. I don't understand it. Like knowing the names of a couple gangs does not make me an expert in Mexican security policy. So I don't really know how they can do it, but that's what they need because they already have the export manufacturing. Now they just need like, grocery stores that don't get robbed. They need like local business feeling safe to open business, and they just don't have it. And so that's really what they need. All right. So let's talk about, let's go a bit south. Who should we talk about? Should we can talk about like El Salvador locking up all the criminals, but I think that's kind of the only story there.
Why hasn't Brazil materialized?
Well, it has. I mean, Brazil.
People were more bullish on it, right?
They were, but then that was during a time when. So Brazil is a primarily resource exporter, but Brazil. People were very bullish during a time when resource prices were very high, which was in the 2000s, right? It was like, okay, China's expanding really fast and it's going to buy all these resources. Where is it going to buy them? Brazil. So Brazil is going to get richer from selling resources. Well, guess what? Resource prices don't go just up and up, right? They go up, then they go down, because when they go up, people mine more and then they go down and they go off the market and they go down. Unlike, for example, housing in California, which we refuse to glut. But minerals actually do get glutted, and they got glutted, and then resource price went down, and then Brazil hit some stagnation. They elected this wild man named Bolsonaro. who, was, anyway, he's kind of wild. But then they, their other option is Lula, who's a little bit, corrupt and likes to sort of pretend to like be a tanky, um, which he mostly does just to like curry support with the left in Brazil. But the point is that they've got unattractive options for leaders, and they've also got some of the resource curse, right? Like controlling mining in Brazil makes you on top. But so Brazil does have some things really going for it. One is Brazil managed to have a successful industrial policy. Brazil, so list of countries that are successful commercial aircraft like manufacturers and exporters: the United States, France and Germany with Airbus, Brazil, not Japan. Japan tried for years to make a commercial aircraft, has never succeeded. Japan has never managed to become a commercial aircraft manufacturer, but Brazil did. Isn't that weird? Like, if you just think that these countries like, oh, Japan is a country that makes things because they're in Asia and they have, like factories of things, but Brazil, they just dig up rocks. And yet Brazil can make a commercially viable aircraft, right? With Embraer. That's the Brazilian company, Embraer. And you don't hear about them crashing like Boeing. And then Japan could not, South Korea could not. China's trying really hard now. Like, they're trying really hard. And they've still had a lot of trouble. Like, it is an area in which Brazil has outmanufactured China and Japan and South Korea. That's kind of cool. The army did it. It was the army. Especially they had a dictatorship for a while back in the day. And the army tried all these industrial policies and they almost all failed except for one, which was the aircraft thing. So the thing is, Brazil needs to think like, okay, how could you do that again? How could you have like Embraer 2 for, say, cars or, machine tools or something? Like, how could you have a second export industry? So Brazil, it has a large population. If you want to get South American manufacturing going, Brazil is where it's going to start. And Embraer sort of points the way forward. But it's going to be an uphill battle because of Dutch disease. It's going to be an uphill battle because South Korea. I'm just saying silly names today. Because South America has so many resources, so many minerals, that's what the world wants to buy from them, which raises their exchange rate and makes wages uncompetitive and costs uncompetitive. So they're going to really have to fight against that, and they're going to have to do really pockets of high value stuff like Embraer, right? That's kind of the way forward for South American manufacturing. But I think they can do it. So I believe that Brazil can actually do this, but it's going to take some doing, and it's going to take, some leadership that's not just focused on domestic, like political food fights. Like, it's going to take someone better than, Lula's been okay, a lot better than Bolsonaro. He's reduced inequality with some social programs, so it's going to take someone better. Latin America is beating inequality. You've heard the phrase Latin American levels of inequality. Yeah, we're approaching Latin American levels of inequality here. No, like Latin America has been making vast and continued strides against inequality. I think Uruguay is the best. But then many, many countries have been doing this in Latin America. And they elect liberals. They elect people who are on the left. But this isn't like, it's not even like it's not like communist left, and it's not even Bernie Sanders left. Honestly, they're really just electing like Elizabeth Warren type people, right? And what are these like center leftist governments doing? They do social programs. Yep, they do welfare, but they also do education. They pour a lot of money into education. So Latin American education levels have been improving. Housing, they build a lot of housing. They improve healthcare systems. Housing, healthcare, and education are kind of like the three big like things that aren't necessarily like classic public goods. They are not quite like infrastructure, research, and those things, but they are like things that government can provide pretty well at scale, and that don't often get provided by private industry for other reasons, right? Like housing doesn't get provided because of NIMBYism, not because of any dysfunction in the housing market. Just NIMBYism, right? So government just overrules that. And then, healthcare doesn't get provided because of various market failures, adverse selection, blah, blah. So government provides it. Education, same thing. And so Latin American governments have been doing this, and you've seen inequality go down across the board. And some Latin American countries are a very nice place to live, like Chile, a really nice place to live. And Colombia is increasingly nice place to live. So Latin America, these places have been doing pretty well on reducing inequality, and they're growing only very slowly. But that's okay. Like they're not impoverished. These are not impoverished, desperate countries, right? The only impoverished, desperate countries are in the northern triangle of Central America. Those like Guatemala, Honduras, Nicaragua, and El Salvador. Like those countries are poor, violent. They send us a lot of like a lot of the people coming up in the asylum caravans or whatever are from those countries because they suck. Maybe I think maybe Bukele's got El Salvador under control, but still Honduras, Guatemala, Nicaragua are not under control. So maybe they need their own Bukeles. But South America is like, and of course Venezuela is a basket case because they had their experiment with Chavez socialism. But I will note, by the way, that socialism actually did okay in Bolivia. Like they had a explicit socialist government, yeah, and then they did have like a military coup attempt, like back in like 2019 that got defeated. Or was it 2020? I don't actually remember when that was. They tried to coup the socialist guy, and he like stopped. They protests stopped. Anyway, but they've done a really good job of redistribution in Bolivia. Bolivia is a mining focused country, and they effectively redistributed the natural resource rents to the people. And Bolivia is a nicer place to live. So socialism won. Then in Venezuela, completely collapsed. What's the difference? There were a couple differences. Number one, in Venezuela, they got money for social programs and for payouts to cronies, honestly. They got money for those two things by raiding the state-owned oil company PDVSA, which is Venezuela had like the best state-owned oil company. It's a national company. It was the people owned the oil. And guess what the people did with the oil? Wasted it. They didn't invest. So production fell off a cliff. And that's what really started the economic crisis. The other thing that happened was that Chavez had a lot of political enemies, and he nationalized a lot of businesses, and he created a very bad business climate. And then when this all caused macroeconomic problems, they responded very badly to the inflation by doing by trying price controls instead of getting their macroeconomics under control. So they ran big deficits and, had low interest rates and tried to counter this with price controls, which, are a shitty way of controlling inflation. Despite what Isabella Weber of Germany thinks, they don't really work very well. And Venezuela basically collapsed because they made those mistakes. And Bolivia didn't make those mistakes yet. They redistributed a bunch of stuff, but they didn't disinvest from mining activity, and they did not arbitrarily nationalize a lot of like regular people's businesses. They said we're socialist, but like they're not commies, right? They're like tax and spend liberals, basically. They're not commies. Yeah.
When Bernie Sanders was praising Cuba, should he have been instead praising Bolivia?
Yeah, absolutely.
Interesting. Which country in Latin America are you most bullish on relative to like where their stock is now, where it's going to be in the future, and similarly bearish based on where the stock is now?
Ooh, I like it. We should have done that with all the regions. Colombia, I'm bullish on. They are Colombia has stability. It has like somewhat proximity to the U.S. It has they've gotten rid of their like long running conflict with the stupid terrorist group called the FARC, the leftist dorks. They basically resolved that. Colombia has possibility to be a really nice economic story, and they're not at that high a level of income yet. They really have a lot more to go. So I'm pretty bullish on them. Bearish. Everyone's so bearish on like Latin America in general that I find it hard to find like a place where people are too bullish, right? Argentina, I think Milei is not going to fix what ails Argentina, and you're just going to have more crises. Like I like Milei, but Tyler Cowen's been writing a lot about this. He's like Milei is like he's doing a few good things and then he's like messing around with a bunch of stuff. He's just like Argentina refuses to be a serious country. Argentina motivates itself entirely on rhetoric, ideologue, posturing. Argentina is the successor to medieval Spain. Argentina is what medieval Spain would have been had it just sort of continued on that track to modernity, all the way to modernity. And it really has inherited the medieval Spanish institutions of just like, the big plantation farmers and just like extreme classism and just like performative bullshit. And it's just, well, Spain has moved on from that after the Civil War, but Argentina sort of has not. So I don't think Malay can fix Argentina. So I'm bullish on that. Should we add Dominican Republic to Latin America?
Sure.
Because I mean, it does speak Spanish. Yeah. Dominican Republic is great. The Dominican Republic is awesome. They're growing fast. They do manufacturing. They're a very stable country. They're really good. And this is despite America having invaded them twice. And, and having like Dominican Republic history is full of war. They were conquered by the Empire of Haiti, right? How would you like to be conquered by the Empire of Haiti? Like, is there a bigger L in this world? Like, but they like that lasted, I don't know, 20 years or something. And then they fought for their freedom and then they won and they ejected the Empire of Haiti. And that was the end of the Empire of Haiti. And then Dominican Republic in the 1930s genocided the Haitians.
Wow.
Yeah, they committed genocide. And the way they did this, because they like everybody looked black. They couldn't tell who was from where. So they went around and they said in Spanish, they had a sprig of parsley and they said, "What is this?" And if you're a native French speaker, you can't say the Spanish word for parsley very well, perejil. And like, you can't say that if you're a French speaker. And so like, they would just stumble over themselves. And so, so they were like, "Oh, if you can't pronounce parsley, we just machine gun you. We shoot you."
Oh my God.
And then, yeah, right. And then, but then the thing is, like, if you're just some random Spanish speaker, some dude, like, and someone comes up to you with a machine gun and shoves some parsley in your face and says, "What's that?" And you're like, and then they should shoot you. Cilantro? Like, then they just kill you. I'm laughing about genocide. I should never do that. It was like, it's just the dumbest genocide ever. Like, yeah. So I just feel so bad, for the people who are like cilantro and then just got shot. Anyway, genocide is bad and you shouldn't do it. It was really bad. It was a guy named Trujillo who did that as a dictator in the 30s. He thought he was going to be like fascist Nazi, join the fascist international movement. And the first thing we're going to do is kill those Haitians. And that did not work. I mean, like it was bad, but America invaded later. And then after that, usually you think of an American invasion as being destabilizing and like, oh no, we invaded Iraq or whatever. We actually stabilized the country. And after that, Dominican Republic was pretty stable and started growing and now is up to like about $20,000 per capita GDP, which is not rich, but it's not poor anymore. And they're doing they have a balanced economy. They have manufacturing export zones. We make stuff. American companies make stuff in the Dominican Republic. And they have like finance and consulting and like there's a bunch of Dominicans in like finance and stuff like that. Actually, there's a bunch of Haitians in finance too. They just have no contact with Haiti itself. The contrast between the Dominican Republic and Haiti is insane. Like, the Dominican Republic is this nice place to live that's growing fast and is super, stable. And Haiti is just like deforested. You can see the border, like Haiti has no forest because they chopped down all the forest for money. And then now you have no forest anymore. It's like the Lorax from Dr. Seuss. It's like, yeah. And Haiti's just like, now it has cannibal gangs, right? You can watch that lovely video where a guy eats another guy's dick.
Oh my God.
It's pretty gross. Yeah, it's horrible. And yeah, no, maybe the cannibals are nice, they just want to sit down and chew the fat, right? They won't have a bone to pick with you. Anyway, you got to hand it to them. Anyway, all right. So enough of that. Haiti's in really big trouble. And the thing we used to do when Haiti was in really big trouble was we would invade them, right? Like in 94, we would just send troops. We'd stabilize it ourselves. Now we're not going to do that because like, we don't do that anymore. We don't invade countries anymore because Iraq. Well, okay, fine. We're just going to evacuate our people and watch the whole country collapse and then have a big fight over whether to take Haitian immigrants. And then like Ron DeSantis is like, no boat people. And then like that will happen. And then some Haitians will like boat people to Mexico and try to make it up to the southern border. And everyone will get really mad and Republicans get really mad. And then like we're being invaded, blah, 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 blah.
Yeah.
Good job, everybody. Anyway, very nice. Anyway, Haiti's screwed. I don't know what to say. Although, like, the smart people just get out of Haiti. Like, there's a ton of like rich Haitian hedge fund managers and real estate people in New York.
Yeah.
Like, they are, very rich, do very well. And they just, maybe sometimes they send some money to their family in Haiti, but they don't do anything to stabilize the country because, like, there's not much they can do. Like, Haiti needs someone to basically come in with an army and just, shoot all the cannibals and whoever, and just establish order, right? They need to do that. Unless, and it can't really be the U.S. Army either, because the U.S. Army will then leave. We did it to Dominican Republic and they were stable afterwards, but then like we also invaded Haiti twice and then it wasn't stable afterwards. So that trick often doesn't work, right? It's the rare time when a U.S. invasion actually results in stability afterwards. So basically, I don't know, someone needs to do that, but I don't know who. Maybe Brazil can help.
Yeah.
Lol, who am I kidding? Okay.
Is it, before we're wrapping up, is it worth mentioning Canada or?
Oh, Canada. Yeah, Canada's economy has been, it's one of those other economies like Saudi Arabia that's been stagnant for a long time. Like, Canadian living standards, are basically the same as they were in like the mid 2000s and have recently had a precipitous drop. That's not good. Canada went way too hard for the petrostate thing. Mistake. Canada, like, it's just, you live and die by the resource price if you're just digging up a bunch of stuff. And Canada really had very marginal oil, like those tar sands. That's crappy oil. Canada needs high-tech stuff, but unfortunately, so I bet you know a whole ton of smart Canadians, right?
Yep. Yeah.
Well, that's because they all move here.
Right.
Like Haiti, but not quite, but much more polite and peaceful than Haiti. But still, all their smart people move here. And so in that, it's very hard to build up domestic sort of industrial clusters in Canada, especially because Canada's pretty NIMBY. Like, they have a lot of NIMBYism. They're trying to defeat NIMBYism with indigenous rights. So and actually we should try this too. So they're trying to, so Vancouver is like, giving, indigenous people like the ability to build like whatever they want. Right? It's your land. Here, go for it, Squamish Nation or some other. They call Native Canadians the First Nations. So they give the nations, which we would call tribes, the land. They were like, okay, here's this land, build whatever you want. And they're like, okay, housing. And so they plan with Taiwanese architects. Actually, they design these like giant solar punk skyscrapers of housing. And then like all the white NIMBYs like, oh my God, housing, my views. And so then like, there's the cold open. And so then they're like, no, we must honor our commitment to the First Nations. We are on stolen land. And, in America, when you say we're on stolen land, it's more of a flex. It's like, we're on stolen land. And then like, pray that I do not steal more. But like in Canada, it's like, here's your land. Use that land, right? It's like, and so, we're sorry we did that. Here's your land. And then like, what do you think people are going to do with land in the modern world? Do you think they're going to like hunt bison and like farm corn from the middle of Vancouver? No, they're going to build housing because that's what everyone wants. And this is the 21st century. And we are modern people who don't we want to live in like Native Canadians, Native Americans want to live in a modern world. And so of course they're going to build housing. And they're also building battery factories on Vancouver Island, which is pretty cool. But I love this Yimby land back, right? It's like, when you really, and so of course the American land back proposals, right, is all about giving some tribe stewardship of some environment area. You're basically like hiring people to be like the Tolkien elves of your imagination and be like stewards of the land, the nature people who represent the purity of this land before our industrialization despoiled it and blah, 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 blah. But like, you're not actually treating people as like fully autonomous people able to like build industrial stuff, which we should be doing. And I hope that someone's working on this in the United States. Maybe Neil Gorsuch is working on this. He's like #1 native rights guy. So someone needs to be working on letting, Native Americans build whatever the hell they want. We did that a little bit with casinos. We need to do that with like factories We need battery factories, and obviously we can't decide to put those there, but if we let Native Americans build whatever they want, that's going to be one of the things they build, because they, if we just say, okay, no NEPA for Native Americans, that doesn't exist. No CEQA at all, right? No permitting, none of this stuff. Native Americans, it's your land, you build this, right? We have these treaties, these old obligations of treaties that say this in Oklahoma, like half of Oklahoma, this is your land, build whatever you want. They're going to build a bunch of factories. They're going to build housing. They're going to build stuff that makes them money. So this is what we need to do. Canada's sort of showing the way in Vancouver, and I really like this.
Great. I want to be mindful of time, so maybe we wrap here. For if there are any questions we didn't get to, that people or countries didn't get to, or questions that people have, we're doing a mailbag Q&A episode. We're doing an ad for it at the beginning of these episodes, so people can submit questions and we go deeper on any specific economy or country.
In fact, I think we should have that be a regular part of Econ 102.
Yes.
Let's start doing that.
So people submit your questions. And Noah, this was a amazing display of your general knowledge across the global economies. And thanks so much for doing it. As always, until next time.
Until next time.
Econ 102 is a podcast from Turpentine, the network behind Moment of Zen, In the Arena, The Cognitive Revolution, and more. If you like what you hear, subscribe and leave us a review in the App Store. You can keep up with both of our Substacks for written analysis of the topics we cover in the show at noahopinion.substack.com and eriktorenberg.substack.com. Thanks for listening.